Welcome to the IVM Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Paodcast, presented by the Daily Pao.
This is Pranati,
Purva,
and we're from the Daily Pao, a Bombay-specific culture and food site. And this is our fortnightly podcast,
The Paodcast.
Now, the third voice you heard, if you were listening carefully, is the voice of Roshni Bajaj Sanghvi. She's a columnist for us. She writes a food column called Monthly Specials, and she's standing in for Amit, who is, the
He's
third...
on vacation.
He's on
He's
vacation,
the
vacationing in
third
various
partner
parts of South Asia. So Roshni will fill in for Amit this time. So in this episode in Bombay Binge, which is our food section, we'll be talking about Khakhra. Roshni recently did a column on this. In the scene, which is our culture segment, we'll discuss censorship in theatre. And in Metro Station, our city news and history showcase, we'll talk about the Plague Museum. So stay tuned for Bombay Binge.
Bombay Binge.
So on this episode of Bombay Binge, Roshni, who is our columnist, as you've heard, she did a very fascinating piece on the Khakhra recently and on the origin and evolution of the Khakhra in Bombay. It's a favorite snack. Pranati and I love it. We eat it all the time.
I eat it for breakfast every day.
Yeah, and so Roshni, in addition to highlighting the different types of Khakhra, she's also... anyway, Roshni, you tell us. It's better if you tell us.
So, one very interesting thing that I found in your piece, you spoke to a couple of old veteran Gujarati ladies and got them to tell you how the Khakhra originated. And I mean, this is something that's difficult to find out, right? Because it's how do you document something like this? So maybe you can start by telling us what they told you.
I had this idea a little over 2 months ago when I was doing the community spice shops, the masala shops, and I went to Sindhi provision store in Kolaba. And while looking for Thandai mix and, Sindhi garam masala, I found this pack of Manyar's Khakhras, which had really weird flavors, and they were right there at the cash counter. No-minute noodle, chocolate Khakhra, things, stuff like that. The next day I called up Amit and I told him, since Navratri is 2 months away, can we talk about Khakhra in almost a Darwinian sort of way, like the origin, the evolution of the species. I wanted to find out how Khakhras came into being. Who had the idea to sort of crisp up a roti and make it last forever? For Gujarati sort of trips, it's second only to the thepla.
Right.
It travels really well, and while it started out as a simple sort of wheat Khakhra that had been crisped up on the tawa, now you have some really crazy shapes and flavors. Including dosas which have been converted into Khakhras, which
are amazing.
Yeah, you don't even think about dosa as a Gujarati snack, but it actually is. If you look at the success of Muthuswamy as a caterer, dosas are had in my extended Gujarati family for fun, for dinner.
Right.
Just like bhel is. It's
right.
An entire, it's looked at as tonight we're going to have dosa for dinner.
Right.
So I just wanted to see how the Khakhras come from a preservation technique to what it is today, where you have chocolate Khakhra and Shezwan dosa Khakhra. Except that I didn't think of it initially as a preservation technique. I thought it was just somebody's...
it was just an idea someone had.
No, I didn't even think it was an idea. I thought it was a mistake.
Right.
Like a roti left on...
I just thought that somebody crisped up a roti too much or left the roti on the tawa to heat, stay warm, and then forgot about the roti and then realized that they have a Khakhra the next morning.
Right.
But that was not the way it actually came out. My hypothesis was entirely incorrect. It was very deliberate. It was invented, as most things are, due to necessity by Jains who don't eat basi food.
But is this also a hypothesis, or how certain are you of...
Well, both Beena Gandhi of Atma Vallabh, which is the NGO that makes Khakhras in Nalasopara using women who are in financial distress to help them out, and Pushpa Mehta, who's Woodside owner Pankaj Shah. He also owns the pantry in Woodside all day. He got me in touch with his nanny, and Pushpa Mehta, who's 82 years old, is an authority on Gujarati food, and is apparently unbeatable in the kitchen. Told me that at least 10 generations ago it was invented by Jains as a way to preserve food, to prevent it from extra rotis going to waste, so that it could still be consumed without breaking any of the tenets of sort of Jainism and their rules of like eating food that has not spoiled.
Fresh food, essentially.
Yeah, so no pickles, no fermentation, like all of those. There's a link in the story that talks about their rules, and Khakhra adheres to all of them.
Right. No, so essentially, what did she say? It was basically a roti that had been crisped on a tawa, and then crisped to such a degree that it became sort of flat and disc-like and could be stacked and preserved. Essentially, that's what happened.
So the flat and disc-like khakras have come because of automation, and there are a couple of links that will show you how they're made by on the assembly line by machines. Originally, it was done on the concave roti tawa.
Right.
It was just a roti that was pressed and pressed and pressed until it took on pretty much the shape of the tawa. And all the moisture was drawn out of it because of the heat.
And it's moisture that makes food rot, which is why you need to...
Or spoil. Jainism doesn't allow you to eat food which has bacteria in it. So there's no chance of bacteria growing in food that has no moisture, right?
Right.
Moisture's like when we talk about time and temperature control and food safety, one of the big things that we have to be careful about is moisture. With time and temperature, moisture will cause foods to spoil. If there is no moisture, it won't spoil.
Right.
You know what I found really interesting is that you mentioned that there are Khakhra Maharajas and Khakhra Walis. Now, how does one get a hold of these? I'd love... So does a Khakhra Maharaj come to your home and then you tell him, I want this many number of khakras, and then he does all the calibrations of the oil and stuff on his own, or how does that work?
To find a good Khakhra Maharaj, call your friendly neighborhood Gujarati.
Okay.
But the great thing about a Khakhra Maharaj is, you have a discussion with them a couple of days before they show up, and you tell them, I want 200 khichdi khakras, 325 methi khakras.
Oh, okay.
So you say things like that.
Volumes,
and then,
right.
Because he's going to spend the whole day, you may as well make good use of his time.
And he's cooking this in his own
No,
home?
he comes to your kitchen.
Oh, he comes to your kitchen. Okay, great. Yeah.
So you clear up the kitchen, make it easy for him to work, and then he'll spend like 6 hours or 8 hours and make whatever, several hundred khakras for you.
Okay.
With great dexterity and skill and speed.
Yeah.
And you have 100% control on the ingredients.
Okay.
So, if you're making khichdi khakra, then he will either make the khichdi for you or he will ask you to make khichdi.
Right.
He will ask you to get, the day before, he will ask you to sort out ingredients for the numbers you've given him and the kinds that you've given him.
Right.
And then he comes to your place and makes them to your sort of specifications.
But you can also, there are also Khakhra Walas and Walis who make Khakhra in their own homes.
And then, but are they door-to-door salespeople?
Prawn will tell you, she has one.
So you do have door-to-door salespeople as well. So we have a Gujarati Farsan guy who comes to our building. Yes,
Okay.
But I
I
think he sells the fairly industrial varieties of khakras, but we also have a khakra wali called Meena Ben who makes khakra in her home.
Right.
So we'll order, say, a stack of 200 dal khakras or my favorite ghee sada, and she makes this in her home, and then we have to go and collect it.
Okay.
So they also. It's a little cottage industry. They also work out of their homes.
Wow.
Yeah. But you spoke to a bunch of very industrial khakra makers, people who have crores of turnover. You spoke to Maniyars, and I've seen packets of Maniyars khakras in various shops. You also spoke to
Indu
Atma
Ben.
Bhallab.
Yeah.
And Indu Ben Khakrawala, who has inspired a TV show called Krishna Ben Khakrawala.
So Indu Ben is available here, or are these brands
on order?
All okay?
So once you're a regular customer, then you're a regular customer. But Indu Ben will ship overnight to Bombay. If you call them and if you look at their website, they have hundreds of varieties.
Right.
It's just you can keep scrolling down the page.
Okay.
I spoke to one of the owners, and he said that they have an overnight courier. You need to go and pick it up.
Okay.
I think it's called Eagle Couriers, Eagle Express.
Right.
Otherwise, if you want to deliver to your house, then there are 24-hour couriers, 2-day couriers, stuff like that.
Wow, okay.
And she's based in, I mean, this company is based in Gujarat, right? In Ahmedabad or Surat in Ahmedabad.
I didn't actually get to speak to HSM Foods, which is the parent company for many hours, because they couldn't make time. And so I sort of quoted a story that they had been quoted in the Economic Times. We had an email exchange. They're probably the most ambitious Khakhra making company in the world. They call themselves the largest manufacturer of Khakhras in the world, and they want to occupy the multiple thousand crore segment that biscuits currently occupy.
Right.
And they want to replace, in a way, the position of biscuits in India.
Right, with Khakhra.
Yeah, which is why they have Vanilla G, which is their version of Parle G. It's sort of like a milky sweet Khakhra, and then they have chocolate Khakhra for children.
How is Vanilla G? It sounds awful.
Vanilla G, actually, I didn't get to try because it wasn't at Sindhi provision stores.
Yeah.
Chocolate is not as bad as it sounds, but like the thing is, Induben does a Cadbury,
Right. Yeah.
which I'm very curious about.
Okay.
You see, the Cadbury is probably to avoid copyright infringement.
Right.
Yeah. There are some truly indecipherable names, which I think I couldn't even pronounce them. So,
But what about stores like your Neelam, which is in Santa Cruz? It's so popular, or even a Patel stores. Are those sort of good ones to try? I'm guessing all those are also coming from someone's home. And how should a Khakhra novice go about shopping? What would you recommend getting into first? Or
Well, Neelam is actually great for Khakhra.
very good. Yeah.
Okay.
Cheda is also very good,
Right.
both Matanga and Nepensi Road. But the thing is, the ladies I spoke to said, one, you should see how the Khakhra is roasted.
Right.
So you should look at the color, which even in a regular wheat Khakhra with no masalas added, there should be no dark patches. You know that it's evenly done. It's not been hastily done on high heat.
No pigmentation.
No pigmentation.
Okay.
No dark spots.
Okay.
And no bubbles, because then both of these indicate sort of lack of skill and laziness.
Right.
Laziness because you use oil, or maybe the wrong kind of oil, and that causes bubbles in the Khakhra. You're supposed to press it on a light or medium heat for a long period of time.
Right.
You can't. Khakhra is it's time consuming. It has people who do the 30 Khakhra stack rotate it from up to down, so
Right.
that each one gets heat and then gets a break of the heat.
Okay.
Even the assembly line Khakhra that you'll see it gets pressed several times.
I was intrigued by this because how do you rotate Khakhra without breaking it?
It's skill, it's dexterity. It's also, you figure, if you're making it by hand, then you make it on the round, like the concave tawa.
Right.
Then you sort of, everything has the same shape, right? So it's layered.
Okay.
In that sense that you don't, it's the amount of pressure you put on the Khakhra and the period of time that you put it for.
Okay, so that would really be a sight to see.
Yeah.
Stacks of 30 Khakhras
Call a
being
Khakhra
made.
Maharaj home.
Yeah. Or go to Atma. Can we go to Atma Vallabh?
You
and
can, if
see
you're
and-
willing to make the trek to Nalasopara.
Right.
You can.
And they're okay with people
Yeah.
And you can buy directly from there. Or?
We'll have to ask. I'm
Okay.
not sure about
Right.
that.
Okay.
The other option is a place like Food Spot, which gets its Khakhra. There are lots of little organizations like Atma Vallabh that make Khakhras, little galas, little sort
Okay.
of garage shops.
Like a Papad enterprise as well.
Yeah.
That's how it's done.
And a lot of them
Yeah.
are meant for the upliftment of women in that neighborhood or that
Right.
community. So a lot of them are Mahila Udyog
Yeah.
style
Yeah.
operations.
Yeah.
The other option is to go to shops which offer you tastings, and then if a Khakhra tastes good, you buy it. So Food
Yeah.
Spot has, for example, on Breach Candy has broken pieces of Khakhra that you can pick up
Oh,
and
nice.
eat.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
an easier way.
Great. So that's Roshni giving us Khakhra expertise. You know how to shop for them, and do read the piece on the website, and we'll be back with the scene.
Long, long ago, not in Bethlehem, but in a place nearby, there was a wonderful birth of a huge show, which I like to call Cyrus Says. A show that encapsulates everything in human history, from the first Homo sapien to the last Homo sapien. who's traversed the entire world and then come back to India. This is a show which tells you everything about everything. If you want to know, avoid Google, come to us. It's called Cyrus Says. Get new episodes every Monday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts on. You get one banana vada free with every podcast. Right. I'll just check that.
The Scene.
In this episode of The Scene, Pranati will be telling us about censorship in theatre.
So this is a fairly topical issue because 2 weeks ago, Amol Palekar, the actor, moved the Bombay High Court challenging the need for a censorship board for theatre, and I'm not sure how many people outside the theatre scene actually know that all theatre scripts are vetted by a censor board.
I definitely did not know this.
Yeah, so it's called the Maharashtra State Performance Scrutiny Board, and
which was earlier called the Tamasha Scrutiny Board.
And even tamashas are censored.
Really?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Wow.
And only 2 states in this country have a censor board, Maharashtra and Gujarat, and they've had it from the time when they were part of Bombay Presidency. Tamil Nadu had something similar, but a case was filed against it in court, and they've done away with censorship in Tamil Nadu. And so theatre people this has been a long-standing grouse of theatre people. Why do you need a censor board for something like theatre? Because unlike cinema, theatre it's a live medium, and a lot of it is spontaneous. So, I spoke to a bunch of theatre people for this piece that I did, and they were like, we can't control our actors. We don't know what they're going to say on stage because you act on a whim sometimes, or you improvise, and how do you censor something like that? That's one argument against it. The other argument is that, it's ridiculous. Why do you need any kind of censorship? Especially when they've long had a battle with the theatre censors over ridiculous forms of censorship. For example, they often have a problem with expletives. So there's a very famous case of Sakharam Binder, which is a play by Vijay Tendulkar. It was first performed in 1972. And Sakharam Binder, every second word is an MC or BC gali, okay? Because that's how the characters speak. That is how Sakharam Binder, who is, a somewhat strange and often violent individual, a bookbinder, that's how he talks.
We performed that play in college.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
In Sydney.
So the censors sent it back with a whole bunch of cuts, and it was unacceptable. The court was moved, and it ruled in the favor of the theatre walas. Then there were other kinds of censorship, such as the mob. The Sainik stopped the play. Finally, they had to go and show it to Bala Saheb Thackeray, who, strangely enough, had no problem with the play. So my point is that there's a constant battle with theatre censors and theatre walas. Very often, if the play deals with a political issue, they'll try and stop you from
voicing that. Yeah,
exactly, voicing that, because they'll say things like, oh, this might disrupt communal harmony, or their other frequent argument is that this might work on the English stage, but not on a Marathi or Hindi stage, especially when it comes to what they perceive as obscenity.
But in this case, does the playwright or does the script change? The instances in the past, for example, where the theatre walas could, did they have to change their scripts, or what is the compromise?
So very often they do come to a compromise, because you need that certificate to be able to perform in a public venue.
Right.
Though I have to say that after Palekar filed this petition in the High Court, the police commissioner of Bombay said that you don't need a censor certificate to perform in an enclosed auditorium. But so these rules are slightly nebulous.
Okay.
For all purposes, you do need the certificate to perform in a theatre. The theatre guys will not let you stage a play without the certificate. So in order to get the certificate, very often theatre guys do arrive at a compromise.
Okay.
So they'll, maybe cut out a few words here and there.
Right.
Just to get that certificate. Or what happens is, if they're absolutely unwilling to make any cuts, you go into appeal.
I see.
So the censor board has a process of appeal. and the play is vetted once more by a committee formed for this purpose.
Okay.
And then in extreme cases, of course, you have to go to court.
Right.
And this has, as I just said, it happened with the Sakharam Binder case.
What's really curious is that you said that this also applies to stand-up comedy.
Right.
I mean, that is really difficult, right? Because that is,
Yeah.
well, not entirely improv, but majority of it is improv. So, I mean, how does a stand-up comedian sort of work around this? Is this...
So what happens, and I think this is true of both theatre guys and stand-up comedians, is that and no one will seriously own up to this, because to own up to this you're putting yourself at risk, is
Right.
that you give one version of the script
Okay.
to the censor board and you get it passed.
Okay.
Yeah. But especially as far as stand-up comedy goes, you go and perform exactly what you want on stage. Very often, I'm not sure the comedian knows what he or she is going to say on stage. It sort of depends on so many factors. It depends on the audience.
Yeah.
So I spoke to Sharin Bhatti, who runs The Hive, which is a performance venue in Khar, and they do a lot of stand-up comedy gigs, and they do a lot of open mic stand-up comedy gigs. And she said that I don't even know who's going to perform, so how can I even submit a script for this?
But is there any danger of doing this? Like there are no members of the censorship board, actively attending?
There is a danger. There's always a danger that members of the censorship board, and you are supposed to reserve seats for them,
Okay.
will show up, but people aren't diligent about these things.
Do they show up anonymously, or do they?
I don't think they usually show up. Also, very often, members of the censor board are theatre people themselves. So they're a mix of theatre people, they're a mix of bureaucrats, a mix of various kinds of people. So obviously, if it's theatre people, you're more likely to
Get away
have
with
a sympathetic ear
Yeah.
and get away with certain things. But in general, as one script is submitted,
Yeah.
and then people just go ahead and improvise.
I mean, because
What
there's a lot of swearing, especially during stand-up. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is very political because this country just provides so much
Right.
fodder. So,
So there's no way that something like that
yeah,
could have been passed by the censor.
right.
But, as is the case in many things in India, you
Yeah.
have to find ways to, get past rules, regulations in order to create art, create culture.
So this appeal now, this petition
By Palikar.
by Palikar, it's been submitted.
It's been
and-
submitted to the High Court.
Right.
And so now it'll play out.
Okay.
The censor board has responded saying that you do actually need a censor board.
Okay.
You can't do away with it.
Right. And he's asking for the complete abolition of the censor.
Yeah, because there's absolutely no
No need
reason
for
to
it.
have
Yeah.
censorship in theatre. I mean,
Okay.
no other state in the country has it, and it really serves no purpose. Like an argument like it works on the English stage but not on the vernacular stage. I mean, what kind of argument is that?
Right.
Who's the person who's 100% for censorship, and what is the argument for it?
I mean, the argument for theatre censorship is generally the argument for any kind of censorship, which is that, certain things are not meant for mass consumption. Obscenity, for example. But, I mean, obscenity could mean anything, right?
Yeah,
so
because we're not
obscenity...
adults.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. If you have a problem with it, just don't watch it, which should be the logical thing to do.
Yeah.
But, they would say things like too many swear words, it's too obscene, or things that have a sexual connotation. So, for example, Sunil Shanbag, who's a theatre director, told me that one of his plays was called Club Desire. And in the script, there was a stage direction. She looked at him with longing, or something to that effect. She looked at him with desire. And they scratched that out. They said, no, she can't look at him with desire.
Oh my God.
I mean, that's
So
a
it's a bunch
stage
of prudes.
direction
Yeah.
that's being censored.
Right.
So that's the level of sophistication.
Well, you'd think
lack
that
of.
theatrewalas within the board would be lobbying for the abolition or something.
Yeah.
Also, how many
You
people in the audience would object to that little sort of like look or just like an expression. Right?
No one would object.
Yeah.
No one would object.
No, but you also said that the crowd can be pretty
Right. So this is the
touchy
other
about-
kind of censorship, the censorship of the mob. So a lot of theatrewalas have said that, if you remove the censor board, the fight is only half won. But you also have to educate people and in India we take offense so easily to things. So for a few years ago at Prithvi, Nadira Zahir Babbar, who runs a Hindi theatre group called Ekjut, they did a play on MF Hussain. MF Hussain has been a controversial figure. He was hounded out of the country by Hindu right-wing groups, and the play was called Pencil Se Brush Tak, and it was about the life of MF Hussain. I've seen this play. There was nothing controversial about it. It's not even a good play, okay? But you had the Hindu Jan Jagruti Sena or Samiti object to this play, because it was MF Hussain, and they've long clashed with MF Hussain over his depiction of women deities.
Yeah.
So Prithvi said that, we have a censor certificate. We're not doing anything wrong. You can't stop us. So that was an instance of a censor certificate coming in handy. But so there's also the censorship of the mob, which is something that has to be tackled, and that can only be tackled by way of public discourse.
So what happens when someone complains? Like in this case, how does it typically play out?
So then the cops come, and then Prithvi will say, we have a censor certificate, the cops can't stop us. But if the cops feel that it could be a law and order situation, then they can stop you. So it really depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on the context. The elections were around the corner when this play was being staged. So the cops told Prithvi, just postpone the play.
Yeah.
And they said, no, we're not going to postpone it. We're going to go ahead and do it, because once you start, agreeing to these, bending to these ridiculous rules, then it doesn't stop. It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
So we just got to wait out and see whether Palekar's petition comes to.
Hopefully it's successful.
Yeah.
And this silly institution is scrapped. Okay,
All
so
right.
that's it for the scene, and we'll be back with Metro Station.
Hi, I'm May, and I'm a huge fan of the indie music scene in our country. A scene that's relatively underground, even though it sometimes speaks its head overground, but there's no shortage of talent, and I get the privilege of interviewing some of the most awesome musicians on my show. I've had the likes of Euphoria, Kirsch Kale, Hardcore, Randolph Correa. I've had singer-songwriters, folk singers, electronic music producers, playback singers, rappers, fusion artists, instrumentalists, classical musicians, and so on. Whether mainstream or not, these people have chosen to release their original music, and these are the people currently shaping the direction in which our music scene is heading. Join me on my show every Monday and tune in to discover the unique talent coming out of India today. You can catch Made in India on your favorite podcasting app or our very own IVM podcast app.
Metro Station.
On Metro Station this time, we're going to be talking about the plague. It's the 120th anniversary of the bubonic plague. And Pranati, who's been to the Plague Museum, which is at the Haffkine Institute in Parel, and she's going to tell us more about it.
Now, just before Purva, with a very straight face, said all these words, she was laughing because the plague is not everyone's cup of tea.
Definitely don't want to go on a plague walk. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure lots of history buffs will.
Well, so it's the 120th anniversary of the bubonic plague, which took place in 1896, and it was a major watershed moment in the history of Bombay. And I know it's not something to be celebrated at all, but
I suppose we overcame it, so
Yeah.
there is something to talk about.
But so there have been a lot of plague walks recently. All these walking tour companies have been taking people to places that had something to do with the plague, either places that were converted into temporary hospitals during the time, or places associated with individuals that had something to do with the plague. So now the bubonic plague, it's associated with rats. Rats are thought to be the carriers of the plague, when it's actually the rat flea, which piggybacks on the rat that spreads the plague. So in 1896 there was an epidemic, and about 19 to 20,000 people were dying every week. And that's the time, and the plague was first identified by this very good Goan doctor called Dr. Ocasio Villegas. And Villegas, you see a statue of the man. There's a statue of the man at Dhobi Talao, just outside the Framji Kawasji Institute.
Okay.
So that's the man, I don't know how many people know, who identified the plague.
Right.
But the real hero of this, in the narrative of the plague, is a chap called Waldemar Mordecai Haffkine. He was a Russian Jewish bacteriologist. Now, Haffkine at the time was in Calcutta developing a vaccine for cholera. And when the plague broke out, the governor of Bombay invited him to come to Bombay and work on a plague vaccine. So he established, a research laboratory in Bombay, in Parel, the Haffkine Institute. The Haffkine Institute, by the way, used to be the home of Bombay governors. At the time, that area, Mazgaon, Baikala, it was the Malabar Hill of Bombay. But then the plague happened, and the governor moved to Malabar Hill, and Baikala sort of declined. It wasn't as posh as it used to be anymore. So if you've been to the Haffkine Institute, it's this beautiful, massive colonial bungalow. And within this, a couple of years ago, they opened a museum. It's a very modest museum. They take kids to the museum, and it's full of things like, dead rats. So you have stuffed rats and all kinds of rodents.
Taxidermy exhibit.
Stuffed bandicoots.
Somehow it was never part of my school curriculum to go to Haffkine. It was everywhere but there.
No, but this museum was fairly recent.
It's
fairly recent.
Okay, right.
So, and we're all plagued by rats in Bombay. I mean, rats are a huge problem here. So if you go to this museum, you see exactly how many species of rats inhabit the city. And so it's pretty interesting that way.
Everything about the plague is kind of gross, though.
It is. It's very gross.
Because the way the rat flea infects somebody is by they ingest the blood from the host.
Okay.
And then regurgitate it into the person that they infect. That's the one gross thing. The word bubonic comes from the Greek word bubo, which means groin.
Oh.
Right. You looked this up, right? Because you have a perverse fascination for gross medical things.
And basically your lymph nodes would get swollen around. Just do not look at the Wikipedia page. Do not Wikipedia this.
Roshni has already done it.
I would not recommend it.
Definitely not.
Basically, the lymph nodes around your groin get swollen, and then sometimes they burst.
Okay.
You're saying it with such relish. Well, there's one particularly gross exhibit at the museum in Parel, and it's a sort of flask, and it contains a very viscous fluid swimming with what appears to be pieces of fat. Okay, it looks really disgusting, and all the exhibits are annotated. So the note tells us that it was a broth of goat flesh in which Haffkine used to test the plague vaccine. So, pork was outlawed, obviously, because of the sentiments of the Muslim community.
Right,
you couldn't use cow flesh because of Hindus. So, you only had the goat. So the vaccine was tested in this disgusting-looking
I like that they call it a goat broth, because that sounds appetizing, but then you think of plague and you're like,
no. The broth might have been my word. Okay. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But yes, and then you have, various dioramas, and you have models of these huge models of bacteria, and they're kind of freaky to think that things of these shapes and sizes infect your body. So it's a rather interesting museum, and the place itself it's great. I don't know how many people know that the Haffkine Institute produces anti-venin. It's one of the biggest producers of anti-venin, and they have a snake farm. And I remember one of my early stories as a journalist was to go to the snake farm and see venom being extracted.
Well, this is on the premises, or this is
on the premises.
Okay.
There's a little snake farm, and people you can go there.
Wow,
you can go and check it out.
Right.
But the anti-venom demonstration, it's not something that you can just see.
Obviously. Right.
I just happened to be there, and I was doing a piece, and so they grabbed a snake and squeezed some venom out of its fangs.
So this museum is spread over a floor. It's just one floor.
So it's a small museum.
Okay.
It's a 2-level museum.
And, on a regular day, what kind of people visit this?
Lots of school kids.
Okay.
So it's mainly a school kids thing.
Right, okay.
I don't know how many people actually know about it.
But is there a tour, or is just everything is just...
It's pretty well annotated. And I don't know if they do conduct tours, but it's a very small place, so you can see it by yourself. And then you can also, if they allow you to, go to other parts of the Haffkine Institute, see the snake farm, and see the other, specimens they have.
Right.
For a student of biology, it's pretty interesting.
It's a candy store.
Yeah.
For a student of biology, or if you have a mind like Roshni, eternally curious about science. And yeah. That's it for Metro Station. For more updates on the city, you can subscribe to our newsletter on thedailypao.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We're The Daily Pao. If you like listening to the podcast, check out Geek Fruit, hosted by Uber geeks Tejas Menon and Jishnu Guha. This show talks about geek culture from an Indian perspective. Star Wars, comic books, science fiction and fantasy, TV shows, and more.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry to say, but there's been a slight delay due to the apocalypse having suddenly begun. As you can see, there's death, destruction, and chaos taking place all around us. But don't you worry, food and drinks will be served shortly, and I would recommend checking out
IVM Podcasts
to get some of your favorite Indian podcasts. We'll keep you going till this whole thing blows over. Thank you.